Okay, I believe you have something to read from Emmett Fox.
Okay. For March the 1st, it's called Holy Cows. Most people have certain sections of their lives where, for various reasons, mostly unknown to themselves, they do not wish to make any change. These places are set aside and surrounded with an aura of spurious sanctity, like the sacred cows of the East, which are considered too holy to be touched. But if you really mean business about regenerating your soul and body, there must positively be no sacred cows in your life. Nothing is truly sacred but your own indwelling Christ and the process of his awakening. Awake thou that sleepest, and arise from the dead, and Christ shall give thee light.
And that's from Ephesians 5:14, the King James Version. Lamsa's version of it is, awake, O sleeper, and rise from the dead, and Christ shall give you light. And as we know metaphorically, rising from the dead means lifting up your spiritual awareness and your spiritual energy. Okay, well, the title today is of the talk is Empathy, Sympathy, Self-Righteousness, and a Spiritual Walk. And I confess this is, I'll call it a partly baked conversation. I'm still working on it, I guess is the best way to put it. But I want to share what I've accumulated so far. Parts of it anyway. I've got 12 pages of conversation. We're not going that far. But over the last few months, I've encountered a number of articles in places like the Religious News Service about conservative Christian and evangelical churches who fired pastors for the pastors having urged the congregation to have empathy and compassion for the homeless, for migrants, for those on welfare, for the less well-served, for the others. And if you stay in touch much with the news at all, you've encountered a number of ministers who are preaching in favor of mistreatment of anyone they don't like, anyone different from their white male selves, or in some cases white female selves. In other words, we're seeing a whole bunch of people who claim to be Christians and who are preaching the message, I'm okay, you're okay, and they're not okay. And I'm going to move over a little this way so they can see me gesture with my right hand. Now, you don't want to see all the gestures I make with my right hand, but some of them might be useful. At any rate, the preachers who are preaching this, I'm okay, you're okay, they're not okay, to them, they're giving permission to their congregation and they're arguing to the state to mistreat, disregard, and hate the others around them. I think of these folks as hardliners. You know, they self-righteously denounce you if you aren't living life the way they claim you should, and then they gladly turn their backs on you when you're experiencing difficulties, claiming you deserve the troubles you're having. And on a parenthetical note, it's amazing how many of these self-righteous preachers get caught in fiddling around with young kids or with women who aren't their wives or with men who aren't their husbands. Unfortunately, according to some of the reading I've done, this idea that empathy and mercy are sins has gained traction, particularly among supporters of Donald Trump. And there's a pastor who's showing up at more and more governmental functions named Doug Wilson, who's arguing that women only deserve to be home. They should never be given the vote. They should only be having children. That slavery was right because that's what it says in the Bible. Just a whole bunch of crap. But that fits with the I'm okay, you're okay, and they're not okay, which, by the way, in transactional analysis, that particular psychological position is associated with genocide. Just so when you're seeing someone talk that way, think in terms of what they're arguing for in the long term. Now, that's not directly related to what I'm talking about, but it is in a way, because this is what led to the internal conversation that led to where we're going here. Now, Religious News Service works with a survey company, and they did a survey recently about the things that the hardliners don't believe in: empathy, compassion, sympathy, mercy, grace, and so forth. And it found that 8 in 10 Americans see empathy as essential to a healthy society, whereas 16% called it a dangerous emotion that undermines a society guided by God's truth. Now, Elon Musk is quoted as saying that when a society starts valuing empathy, it's a sure sign of a downward society, a decaying society. Now, this said, you may remember Ellie in some of her comments to us in her text. I think she's actually said it here too, about how little support she and Donovan had in their darkest times from the Christian church communities around them and from the Christians around them, compared with the help that they received from their pagan community, from people who weren't associated with religion, and from us, their spiritual community. And this is so far distant from the responses of the early Christian church when plagues would hit the Roman Empire. Scholar Elaine Pagels wrote about how those following Christ's teaching back then responded compared with people from other religions. Whenever a plague occurred, and it wasn't just a one-time thing back then, be glad we have sanitation. Be wary of the preachings of those who oppose sanitation in this particular government. But the priests, the elders of all the other religions, people with the money or with the ability would all flee the city for the highlands or for farms, for outside residences, because they believed, and it was probably true, that they were less likely to get sick and die. The Christians did not, and this is what set them apart from the other religions. They stayed among the sick, taking care of them. They stayed among the sick, seeing that they were fed, bathed, whatever was needed, and if they died, seeing that they were properly buried. They did not abandon people who had nothing to do with their religion, but they were, as we are, children of God. And they understood that they were doing this while they were putting themselves at risk of their own death and dying. They understood that this service to humans, to all of humanity, was what Christ's message and the loving God called them to do. And that's what led me into ruminating about the role of empathy and sympathy and compassion, and what role it takes in folks like us who are seeking to ever better walk the spiritual walk. And so before I move further into the conversation of empathy, sympathy, and so forth, let me share with you, as best I can figure, what my particular spiritual commitment, spiritual walk involves. I suspect it fits well for most of us, but it's not mine to tell you how you believe. But it'll give you a frame of reference for what I talk about from this point. So, this is the basic spiritual understanding that I do my best to own, to live up to. We are all made of God's stuff, living in an overall existence consisting of nothing but God stuff. While we are all designed to find our path to living in a higher and higher frequency of love, Our attempts to do this often fall short because of the distraction provided by the odd-shaped bags of mostly water that we wear on this planet. There should be some smiles at that reference point. That's from Star Trek. You ugly bags of mostly water, said some alien or other. God's message, whether through the Christ Spirit, which has appeared to many peoples, or through other spiritually enlightened teachers, is to show love and caring to every living being and every part of this universe. And that means interacting with empathy and compassion and mercy and even grace. Now, do I accomplish this set of beliefs living up to it? Well, I do my best, but I fall way short. Not even close. But I'm working to do better. Every day, I'm working to do better. So now let's define some of the attributes of living a compassionate life. So let's start with empathy and sympathy, because they're often used interchangeably, but there's actually some fairly big differences. Brene Brown, a scholar, social psychologist, explains that empathy drives connection and sympathy drives disconnection. So empathy is, in a sense, emotion. It means experiencing someone else's feelings. It comes from a German word I won't even try to say, which means feeling into. And it requires an emotional component of really experiencing, being aware of, acknowledging what some other person is feeling and experiencing. It takes discipline. It asks us to step as best we can into someone else's mental and moral world, especially if we find that world unsettling. So, one writer puts it, sympathy is our reaction to reading about the execution of alleged witches in Massachusetts. Empathy is what helps us try to understand why some Puritans believed they were protecting their community by killing. So sympathy means understanding someone else's suffering, but it's more cognitive in nature. It's not feeling what's going on or trying to get on the inside. It's sort of an immediate response versus a more a measured, thoughtful response, perhaps. So it tends to be visceral and emotional when we encounter tales of injustice, tales of slaughter. And a New Testament scholar named Skype McKnight writes of the hardline self-righteous that they missed the point about empathy and mercy and compassion in the Bible. He writes, God cares about justice, but God also... You need this? Okay. But I've just lost my place. But God also shows compassion. He points to the Gospel of Matthew about how Jesus responded when faced with human suffering. And the quote is, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. So compassion and sympathy sort of correlate with empathy. The compassion is when they notice others are in need. The feeling motivates someone to help. But the sympathy is feeling of care and understanding for someone in need. But what we don't want to have happen is to take on the suffering that we are seeing, as opposed to being aware of it as opposed to being motivated to support someone to address it, to make better. And I'm sure we've all, in our community or in our friends, known people who seem to really adore suffering on behalf of somebody else. And that moves us away from God's love, from the good that we are to follow, the love that we are to follow and to exemplify. In fact, one writer calls the opposite emotional contagion, when we allow ourselves to be spattered with the pain of others. Now, where do grace and mercy fit in? I came across a really simple definition. Mercy means we don't get what we deserve, the consequences for our errors in action. Grace means we get what we don't deserve, which is all the blessings, all the love that are rooted in God's presence, the promises, the power that is part of us as God's stuff and accessible to us at all times. So, acknowledging that empathy can be especially difficult in polarized times like this, but be aware that being empathetic for people whose actions we find repugnant or repellent isn't the same as endorsing it. If we're not cautious and let ourselves become emotionally absorbed and accepting of what I'll call Hawkins scale low frequency actions and beliefs and emotions, then we're putting ourselves at risk, and this is not wise, not okay. But if we view empathy as disciplined understanding, being open to someone else's hopes, fears, their moral point of view, their choices in life, that can help us see truth, and through understanding, see how we can contribute to lift the world up. I happened to get curious, and I looked up what empathy, what frequency empathy is on the Hawkins scale. And it's on the level of love, 500 to 540. And it's characterized as a state of unconditional, harmonious connection with others. And it's positioned above reason, which is over 400, and below joy, which is over 450, and below peace, which is 600. But it's, that's not a bad place to be living your life. On the contrast, on the Hawkins scale, self-righteousness is a value of 175, right on the same level as pride. And anything below 200 is non-life supporting, if I can put it that way. And it's below the tipping point of courage, which is 200. And courage is where self-empowerment begins. So the people who are self-righteous are lacking their own awareness of God's love and power in their lives for all their protestations otherwise. And then in the report that I saw, while pride is the primary home for self-righteousness, it can also be mixed with anger, which is 150, and fear, which is 100. And if you think in our polarization, those who are, I'm okay, you're okay, they're not okay, there's so much anger and so much pride and so much fear all mixed together in a not okay situation. And let us be empathetic for them, but let us not take it on. I can say, speaking for myself, while I find Donald Trump's choices and behaviors repugnant, I can also feel sad for him that he is so badly damaged. And speaking of the Hawkins things, that he is living consistently below 200. He is living in non life affirming territory, vibrations. And then I came across a discussion of 3 parts of empathy and the recommendation that we can build our empathetic sensitivity and awareness by practicing all 3 parts. There is cognitive empathy. This is the thinking part where we can imagine ourselves in a situation and what it would be like. There's emotive empathy, the feeling part. And this is sort of standing shoulder to shoulder with that other person and feeling what they're feeling with them, if you will. And then there's empathetic action, which this author, and I don't know who the author is, said this is the most difficult part for me because it actually means sitting in silence, not doing anything. You know, many people default to trying to offer some sort of solution, some sort of perspective, the author says, some sort of diversion. But the theme should be empathy is just the other. Don't just do something, sit there. And this particular author says, while it sounds silly, it takes tremendous courage and vulnerability to sit there and care about that other person for whoever they are, whatever their actions, to care about them, their hurting, their damage. But to do that, we have to resist the temptation to do something to address the situation. And that's where I stopped it. Don't know where to go next, but those are the thoughts that I have today about it all. So, any thoughts, comments, Lori R.?
I like what you just said, especially about the empathetic action, just sitting in silence and not doing anything. I think that's the hardest thing for me to learn, was that part of empathy, because I'm a fixer. I like to find and solve solutions. I'm analytical. My mind's always going of how somebody can fix something. And just to sit there and listen. You know, there's a saying that many times we don't listen to hear, we listen to respond. And those two things, I think, go hand in hand with empathy. We have to learn that, just like when we do healing, it's better if we can teach somebody else how to heal themselves than to always do everything for them. And I think it's the same thing with empathy. Sometimes when you just sit there and listen, they kind of categorize things in their mind, and it helps them put into perspective and get their thoughts going in a different direction where they can find their own strength. And it took me a long time to see that. So I really appreciated the talk. That's a very good start. Thank you.
You're welcome. Somebody else with a contribution. Leah?
Okay. I liked what you were saying. All right, so Trump is not your ideal, but what president has been. Um, Instead of feeling sad or sorry for any person, really, remember that's a negative feeling. So, what you want to do, because remember, if you point a finger at anybody, you got 3 fingers coming right back at you. So, whatever you send out energy wise is going to come right back at you. So, all you need to do is like send him love. doesn't mean all of a sudden you have to like somebody. That's not what sending love means. It just means you're sending a positive energy. Put him in, to me, when I do that, I see the white energy type things, what I visualize, and put him in God's hands as, more or less, take care of him, God. You love him. Thank you. Because remember, if you send out that love, you got three fingers coming right back at you. And that's what you really want. You don't want to waste your energy on the negativity because you want the good things to come. And it's up to between him and God as to how that person takes it. If they don't take it, it's still going to come back at you. And if he does take it, it's still going to come back at you because you put that energy out there, and we're connected to everyone on this planet. That's why we're here. Like that one saying is, no man is an island. So watch where your energy is going. And sometimes that's what they kind of mean is don't do anything, just send out the positive energy. And it doesn't mean you stay on the fence either if you have to be off the fence to do what is right. You just make sure it's not the negative energy that you want sent out. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. Somebody else?
Two people, Brian, Lori Kay and Christy.
Okay, we'll go Lori Kay and then we'll do Christy.
I think Christy was first, but
Oh, okay. I didn't catch that.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've had this thing recently where I've been using metaphors that we're hairs on the same dog. So we're all on the same body. We are all experiencing the same thing. If there's a flea, we're all going to feel it. So it's helping me in my more childly type of illustrations, I guess you could say. The ripple effect. You had said something earlier, and I'm going, well, you threw the stone, or maybe I threw the stone, and I'm watching the ripple effect, but it's still first cause. What was my cause in throwing the stone? So I'm working with a lot of things recently, and religion is the park or the part of where I'm setting it aside to realize the quantum. I'm more into the quantum space. I don't know, but I'm having fun with it and looking at how to digest it and realize how many teachers there have been. I watched a thing last night on Zoroaster or Zoroastrian, whatever, and which obviously puts us into that part of the world. And what are we doing and how are they feeling? And by the way, the three wise men were the priests, Zoroastrian priests, who came to what our biblical terms of the manger were all about. So, whatever that means. But they were good about astrology. They knew the stars, they knew the system, they knew something beyond what our concept is, and we're not even taught. And what I'm more disgusted with every day is that our education sucks, and that our history is being erased, and that we are being put into an ignorance that is beyond measure, and that we have to do for ourselves with each other to continue to find those paths or what feels true or what people are trying to do to say, hey, buddy, wake up here. This has happened in the past, and this is what it looked like, and this is where we're headed if we can't bring ourselves back around. But what I'm getting to when you were talking about the empathy is that I get into the biology because the biology matters, and we've been accosted in so many different ways. COVID has actually injured the brain. Long COVID is reality. There are many things that happen to our biology. And so I go down that aspect of, what is God, what's religion, but what's real? You're in a body, you're physical, your flesh and blood, whatever that is. You are something that's operating in a very real manner. You are tangible. We are cells. And if we look at it, what's happened here? Because I'm working on that myself, and I'm working with it with other people. It's real. And so if it's been damaged, it's how do we reverse it? How do we acknowledge it? How do we go to that place? And are we miraculous healers? Maybe. But at the same time, that empathy is still being affected by what's happening organically. And I'm in the quantum. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Christy. Okay, Lori Kay.
Brian, I love that you invited us into understanding what your focus is on your spiritual walk. Um, I think that's a beautiful and vulnerable and trusting thing to do. And I want to say that it made me think about everything we were talking about, empathy, and but all of it made me think about how I define my spiritual path is different than it used to be. And that when it comes to things like empathy and forgiveness and compassion, um, I remember coming to a place very early in my spiritual walk where I realized I was basically coming from a place of self-judgment. Like my very first idea of spiritual growth was be a more spiritual person. And that's not actually possible. We're already spirit. So good luck with that. But like be a better person, be a nicer person. But the assumption in that was I'm not nice, I'm not this, I'm not compassionate, I'm not the, and everybody in this meeting, compassion and care and awareness is, I mean, that's like, it's hard baked. It's hard baked into us. And so what your talk made me think about was how I've come to such a different place with what spirituality is. The part of spirituality that I think we've reached as a species. Like I think we're being offered the opportunity in the next 200 years, 400 years, however long, to and starting now, to begin to cross the bridge from our idea that we're still reaching for something, and cross the bridge from that into it's already here, I have to practice it, I have to become aware of it, I have to live from a very different, or I can, you don't have to, but to live from a greater place of freedom in which things like empathy and compassion and forgiveness are more automatic because we've brought us into the room. We've practiced a lot of compassion and empathy for other people, but I challenge you to tell me the times you've practiced it for yourself. That's what it made me think of.
Thank you. Somebody else with something to say? Yes, Ellie.
It's interesting that you brought this topic up today, because March 3rd, February 29th was the prosecuting of the witches in Salem. And so a little historical tidbit. But, it took a lot to get to that point. And we all know about King James and the, what's it called? The Malformus. I can never remember it, but it interprets it. It's a document of 500 plus pages that enabled King James to go on his witch hunts in the burning times and prosecute witches, which we all know they weren't. They were women that were independent and healers and scientists and anything that basically challenged the patriarchal order. Don't get me going down that rabbit hole. Anyway, but what they did was they broke up the relationships of women, because before that, women relied on other women for many things. Sisters, aunts, neighbors, women would go to women. I mean, can you imagine a woman going to a man for personal issues? No, they went to other women, but during the burning times, you didn't dare talk to another woman because then you were accused of being a witch. Period. That was it. And so now, that was the breakdown of women relationships. I mean, probably way before then, but that was when we can see in history that breakdown. And as Christy was mentioning during COVID, we are a very physical being, and during COVID and long-term COVID, that interrupted that biology. But the burning times interrupted that as well. So it wasn't just a physical virus. Then it was a spiritual virus at that point. And so now we're having to rebuild those relationships of women being with women, of trusting women again, of, having those sisters and that extended family of, oh, I can go to a woman friend. Wait, what is a woman friend? Because that is completely foreign to us. For those that have them, great. But for those of us that, either don't or didn't grow up with, that is a completely foreign concept. And then for those of us that, grew up in an era that, you couldn't show emotion. Yes, thank you, Sylvie. Sylvie just put it in chat what it was called. But for those of us that grew up with, we can't show emotion, we have to be strong women. What did that do to us? That we couldn't show those emotions, because part of that, as you were saying earlier about vulnerability, empathy, that is being able to be strong. And then of course, all of those negative things go to the shadow self, that, we were not good enough or not enough or too much, or, whatever those things were that people didn't like about us. Therefore, we didn't like about ourselves. So we pushed those things down. And then as we get older, those things resurface in different ways. And we're like, where did that come from? And then the unlift therapy, helps with a lot of those things. But if we're not in that, how do we navigate and maneuver? And Christy was sharing some of the things that she's, been watching and doing. And, Lori R as well, of healing. And, we have to be able to look at those things and say, okay, there's something missing. Now, how can I do that? And Brian, you were talking about the 3 parts of empathy, cognitive thinking, emotive feeling, empathetic, action, just being able to sit there. All of those things help with the unlift therapy as well as the shadow work. And the hardest, as Lori R. was saying, was being able to sit there and not do anything, having those things come to us that we need to work on. I don't know about you guys, but I'd rather be doing something instead of sitting there and, having those things come to me. I don't like silence. Why? Because those things can come in and then you have to address those things.
Use a journal.
In spiritual work, journaling. I don't like journaling. I don't know too many people that do, but it's needful work. And I see you laughing, Brian. You know exactly what I'm saying. But as I said, it's interesting that you brought that topic up on this day because of what happened in history. Now we get a chance of, now what can we do with this moving forward?
Thank you, Ellie. We give thanks to God for the time we spent together, for the sharing of wisdom, for the growth in our own internal walks, personal walks, and the growth of this community. We thank you, God, for giving us opportunities to serve, to teach, to grow ourselves, and to help others grow. We thank you for watching over us as we depart from here, showering our lives with ever more good and guiding us back to share again next week. We say thank you for all this good, dear God, and amen, amen, amen.